We all love a true, scary story when it happens to someone else. Someone who makes all the wrong decisions and puts themselves in mortal danger. It's strangely comforting because we just know that we'd never put ourselves in such peril. But honestly, haven't we all made stupid decisions, left ourselves vulnerable to dangerous forces, human or otherworldly? I know I have. G'day, I'm Kitty. Luckily for me, the otherworldly that I encountered was a friendly, or at least benevolent fairy. If you'd like to watch my personal encounter, I'll leave a link to that video at the end. But this is a dark story, an old story, told by the man who lived through it to his grandson, who has kindly shared it. This experience forces us to ask, what are fairies? Are they nature spirits? Or, in this case, evil spirits? Take a look at this encounter and decide for yourself. Grandpa and I were spending another night on the porch, having a beer and listening to the sounds of an early spring. The snow had melted and the critters were just starting to wake up. The forest was alive with the sounds of insects and small animals as they moved about in the light snow that still seemed to hang around sometimes. I had seen a possum the day before, heard him too as he dug through the trash, so I knew that the snow wouldn't last much longer. As we sat, Grandpa telling me a story about the time a bear cub had crawled into the cab of his truck. In the woods, about 10 feet or so from the house, were fireflies. They were hovering in the air, winking on and off. They were beautiful, the first fireflies of the season. And as Grandpa's story rolled over me like white noise, I felt myself getting up and going over to see them. They weren't too far away. I could get to them in just a few seconds, and I got a little mad when Grandpa grabbed my arm. But the second I took my eyes off the lights, I forgot why. Don't follow them lights, son. Bad things happen if you follow the fairy lights. Fairy lights? I said, sitting back down. Yeah, devious little buggers. They almost got me once. Did I ever tell you about that? He threw his bottle out into the woods and, to my surprise, the fairy lights stopped blinking. Nope, but it sounds like you're about to. Well, Grandpa smiled. Seems that way. Well, this story begins, as most bad decisions often do, with drinking. I was about 16 when I had an encounter with the fairy lights. It wasn't the first time I had seen them, but it was the first time I had really been affected by them. I first saw them when I was about 2 or 3, sitting on my grandma's porch. I got up and tried to toddle after them, wanting to catch them and see what they were. When my grandma scooped me up, boy was I mad. She said I swung my chubby fists at her until there was a door between us and the lights. And then I was just as mild as paint. She told me a few years later, when I was older, that the lights were bad and that I must never follow them. They lead people into the woods, and most of those people are never seen again, she said. No one knows what they are, but they seem to delight in getting people lost. I always went inside when I saw them after that, not wanting that temptation. Grandma told me too that they usually took children, so I was especially wary of them. Grandma had always been honest with me about the things that could hurt me in the forest, and when she told me to beware, I bewared. She helped me a lot, she taught me a lot, and I owe her my life more times over than I can count. This time, though, she wasn't around to save me. They say that luck belongs to children and drunks, and a good thing for me it does. It was a Saturday night, and my friends, Dale, Fred, Clarence and I had pulled back into the woods in Dale's old farm truck. We'd been working all day at the mill, chopping trees to load onto trailers, and we were sticky and tired. Dale had hooked a jug of his dad's shine. His dad was a prolific moonshiner in those days, and we were drinking and talking and just relaxing after a long day. There was talk that America might enter the war. This was World War II, and we were all scared that we might get drafted. We were just backwoods hicks. We didn't know about foreign places and distant theatres of combat, but we knew that men died in war and that men came back crippled and changed. The drunker we got, though, the less we started caring about war, and the more we started loosening up. Dale was in the back of the truck, pretending to be our teacher, Mr. Popper, when he saw the lights. Dale had a knack for imitations, and Mr. Popper was an Englishman with a very thick accent. Dale had been strutting about, speaking to us in that way that Mr. Popper had. Mr. Popper always sounded like someone in a Shakespeare play and went way over the heads of some Appalachian stump thumpers like us. We'd all been laughing and cawing at the way he captured the man so well, and he had just been raising his finger to deliver one of those plummy British idioms that Mr. Popper was so fond of when he stopped and looked out into the woods. He had been silent for about 5 seconds, just staring drunkenly out into the forest, when he finally whispered, "What is that?" We all turned around to see what he was seeing, and that's when we saw the lights too. Growing up in the middle of nowhere, I had never seen a radio tower before, but these lights were like the blinking light on top of one of those towers. They were foggy and hard to discern, and they would wink on and off as they seemed to float. The longer we watched in our drunken haze, the more enticing those lights began to look. Dale had climbed slowly out of the back of the truck and began to walk towards them, and Fred and Clarence were moving like deep-sea divers as they followed him. Even drunk out of my mind like I was, I seemed to remember that there was something I should remember about those lights. And the more I tried to think about it, the more important it seemed. I just couldn't come up with it though, and I decided to follow them into the woods. And so all 4 of us found ourselves tripping through the pitch-black woods by night, stumbling and laughing as we followed the lights. The farther into the woods we went, the more the idea that we shouldn't be here nagged at me. I had a bottle in my hand that I seemed unable to let go of. It was a RC Cola or something like that. The other 3 were in front of me, staggering after those lights. And all of us were laughing and laughing like fools. I remember Clarence tripping over a log and cutting his forehead real bad, but he just got up, grinning and laughing as he continued following those lights. The lights seemed to be making us drunker, if that makes any sense. We kept stumbling after them deeper and deeper as they got farther and farther away. I say they got farther and farther away, but it was like they never moved. Them lights kept blinking and twinkling in different colours, and they always seemed to be farther away than we remembered them. We kept stumbling after them, and they just kept getting farther away, and in our drunken stupor we just never questioned it. We all just laughed and chuckled and said how we would catch them and find out what was making those lights. I don't know if they ever figured it out, but I still haven't to this day. Well, the deeper into the woods we got, the more it seemed like it was getting foggy. The ground was really hard to find, and as we tripped along, we started to feel like we were in a cloud. I'm sorry if this doesn't make any sense, but you have to remember that I was 16 and drunk and under the influence of whatever those lights were. I can only remember this in that muzzy sort of way that you remember dreams. I can see the lights and I can see the fog, and the trees around me are vague outlines as my mind goes in slow motion and then in double time. I couldn't tell you how long we wandered through those woods, but I know where that wandering came to an end. We had come to a point where the lights had started to get closer. There were about 7 of them, and each of them a different colour. I wouldn't be able to have said it at the time because we really didn't have such things then, but they were like the lights on a Christmas tree, only bigger. Oranges and reds and purples and blues and greens and whites, and even a black one that shouldn't have been able to be seen, but it was. The fog was thick around our feet, and I couldn't have even told you what part of the woods we were in. We could have been halfway to Ellijay for all I know, but it hardly mattered, as the lights seemed to be letting us get close at last. We came through a stand of trees, and there they were, just floating 15 feet away from us. Each of them was about 4.5 feet tall and seemed to wink in and out of existence as we watched them. I can hear their voices telling us to come on, to come see them. And I saw Dale stumble forward, his hand outstretched to do just that. Then he fell forward, and I never saw him again. It didn't bother me in that moment that Dale had disappeared. In fact, at the time, it seemed funny. I remember Clarence almost doubling over, laughing, thinking that Dale was pulling a trick or something. Clarence and Fred went forward next, their hands outstretched, like they meant to touch them. They laughed and were slurring their words, saying how they wondered if the lights would be cold or hot. Then they both disappeared, and it was just me. I would have gone with Clarence and Fred too, but the need to make water had overtaken me. I'm sorry to say, in my drunken state, I hadn't even been able to get my pants down, and as I wet myself, the lights kept talking to me. They wanted me to come to them. They wanted me to touch them. They wanted me to see what they had for me. I wasn't afraid. Far from it. I wanted to go. I wanted to see them. And I wanted to see where my friends had gone. I knew that the lights had made them disappear, and I really wanted to see where they had gone to. If that rock hadn't been in my way, we wouldn't be having this conversation, mostly because I'd be dead and you would have never been born. That rock seemed to grab my foot and I went down hard on my face. As I fell, the bottle I'd been holding smashed and I felt my hand get wet and painful as the glass sank into it. The voices in my head changed then, and I heard the worst screaming of my life. It was like the pits of hell had opened up, and I could hear all the tortured souls within. I looked up and I could see the lights pulsating very fast, hurting my eyes and hurting my brain. And so I put my face down in the dirt and just waited for all that screaming to be over. When I came to, it was morning time and my hand was on fire. The alcohol had worn off, see, and as I looked around, I could see the lights and the mist from the night before were gone. I was face down on the forest floor. My pants were stiff from having dried that way, and my hand hurting something fierce. As I got up, though, these things were nothing next to the surprise that awaited me. I stood up and almost tumbled head first over the edge of a ravine. And there, down below, I could see the bodies of my friends. The lights hadn't taken them anywhere. It appeared that the only thing that had taken them was gravity. I stumbled back away from the edge of the cliff and went running into the woods. I didn't care about my hand or my pants or anything except the need to get away from what I had seen. The state police found me 2 days later, dehydrated and starving. My parents, it seemed, had reported me missing, and after they found Dale's truck, well, the state police and volunteers had begun canvassing the woods. They'd almost given up, they said, when they found me sleeping next to a tree. They had bundled me up, got me some food, and asked me what had happened to Dale, Fred, and Clarence. I told them about the lights, and I told them about the ravine, but I couldn't begin to tell them where that ravine might be. I told them that when I had come to, I had seen the bodies of my friends down that ravine and had started running in a panic. They had thought for a moment that I might have been responsible for them falling into that ravine, but there was nothing in my background to show that I had any tendency like that, so they let me go. And a year later, I joined the army and went overseas. They never found the bodies of my friends, and I have been throwing bottles ever since to keep those lights away. I watched him closely as he finished, wanting him to turn and tell me it was all a joke or just a goof. Instead, Grandpa sat looking out at the woods, silent as the grave. He took the bottle out of my numb hand and threw it out into the woods. It made a skeletal breaking sound as it hit the tree, which seemed to bring him out of his state. Why do they fear the sound of breaking glass? I asked him hesitantly. Grandpa only shrugged. I have no idea, son. My grandma might have known, but by the time I saw them, she was 3 years in her grave and too far gone for me to ask. Are they the ones who clean the glass up? I asked him. It was a question I had been wondering about. Grandpa, however, just shook his head and shrugged. He got up and went inside, and I followed close behind him. Suddenly, I wasn't so keen to sit out there by myself. What was it that lured those men? Were these fairies whose bodies are light or luminescent? Perhaps their bodies take a larger form, but only the light was visible. But there was more at play here than just lights. The men were drunk, yes, but they seemed to get drunker the closer they came to the lights, as though it was having an effect on all their senses. We are left to ponder if these were insidious fairies or nature spirits deliberately luring the men to their death. Or maybe they were innocent fairies playing with the men, with no thought to the risk to their mortality. Their bodies were never found. So where did they go? Perhaps they are with the fairies still. Let me know what you think in the comments. I can't wait to read them. But there is one piece of this puzzle which is easy to overlook, which resonates so strongly to me, and that is the lessons taught him by his own grandmother. She had old knowledge and shared this with him. It could be that her wisdom saved his life. Although he didn't understand them in the moment, his instincts alerted him to strangeness. It's a reminder, I think, to listen to those who have gone before us. There is much that we can learn from the past. Thank you for spending some of your time with me. I really appreciate it. If you love my videos and want me to keep making them, please join me as a member of the channel. Click on the join button below to get started. Until next time, stay curious and be kind. Cheerio!